Welcome to another episode of the Mindset Athlete Podcast with me, James Roberts, transformational coach, two-time Paralympian, and TEDx speaker. I have another awesome episode for you today, so let's get straight into it. And on today's show, I've got Darek Symonowicz. After a motorcycle accident in 2007, chose to take control of his life. In 2015, he chose to have his leg amputated and has never looked back. He's representing Canada in sitting volleyball at the Parapan Games in Peru in 2019, where they brought home the bronze medal. After that, he went overseas to play wheelchair basketball with Cologne 99ers. Later, he went back to Europe to pursue sitting volleyball as well. In 2021, Polish club, and I'll let you pronounce that because I can't pronounce it, became Polish champions. Also in 2021, his club team of Leverkusen in Germany became German champions. So welcome on to the show, Darek.
Thanks so much for having me.
That's my absolute pleasure. And you are the first sitting volley male that I've had on the show. So kudos.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, thank you.
So if we go right back before starting sport, Darek, talk to me and talk to the listeners your family background, because obviously surname is not Canadian. Where does the origins start from you, from your family obviously emigrating to Canada?
Yeah, I was born in Poland. My parents decided to immigrate to Canada when I was 5. A couple years later, so we stayed with our grandparents for a couple of years when my parents were coming down here and settling down. And then when I was 7 in '89, my grandparents brought us over and we reunited with my parents. And I've been living in Canada full time ever since. Apart from the training that I've gone overseas to Germany and back to Poland to play a couple tournaments.
So still fluent Polish?
Fluent-ish. Luckily my parents had us speaking Polish at home when we were growing up. So luckily I was able to keep my tongue and my language pretty strong. So yeah, when I went back to Poland, I was able to communicate with everyone, and that part was pretty easy. A lot easier than trying to communicate with people in German, I found. My German is not very good at all.
So what was the experience like for you? Because obviously you and we conversed a little bit over Instagram while you were over in Europe. What was the experience like of obviously training in Germany and then obviously competing in Poland during what is still a pandemic?
Right. So I found that I mentioned, like you mentioned, right? I was in Germany for wheelchair basketball in 2019 when the pandemic hit. So that ended up cutting our season a bit short. The playoffs were totally eliminated, and I flew back in March just as the pandemic was taking off. Obviously, like here in Canada, there was a lot of lockdowns instituted, and the training opportunities here were quite limited. Eventually, there were some exemptions instituted, but for the first long while, it was literally just hitting balls against the wall in my backyard. Like that was what my training was. Like I had after we came back, I was living at my sister's place. And I brought a stationary bike over, I brought over some weights, but my training wasn't really what you would think of an Olympic or a Paralympic athlete to be. So doing as much as I can on my own, eventually I reached out to some athletes that I made connections with in Germany, and I asked what their training looked like. So it was a lot more what I would normally think of training as. So like they were training 3 days a week there. They were doing rapid tests eventually before practices. So when I went back in 2020, we were doing 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And we were doing rapid tests everyone was doing a rapid test prior to the sessions, just to make sure that, there wasn't any real mitigating the risk as much as possible, I guess, right? There were lockdowns instituted in Germany, so you weren't allowed to really do anything apart from go to the grocery store, and come home and pretty much stay at home. The sports were given exemptions. So like Germany had qualified. Actually, at that first year, we were working towards, we were training towards a Paralympic qualifier. That was, for us, it was held in June of 2020. So that first year, the exemption was given to that German team because of the fact that they were training towards qualifying for the Paralympics. So that was, for me, it was like September to December that first time. And then I came back home and we were still in Canada at this point. This high performance exemption was also given to us. The way it was worded, it was towards for Tokyo bound athletes or athletes that are training towards a qualifier. So that first time, everything was good. So I came back in December, started training, getting back on court here in Canada, and back in the weight room and that kind of stuff because I was given that exemption. And then we went to our tournament in June in Duisburg, which was in Germany as well. Unfortunately, we didn't qualify for the Paralympics. I feel like the event went really well for us. We performed, I think, a lot better than we have in previous events. But unfortunately, we didn't qualify. And then when I came home, I was shocked to find out that I no longer qualified for this exemption. So at that point, my training went back to pretty much zero, is whatever I could do in my house. I made the best of it. I got a VR system and I tried to do as much as I could with like reflex kind of stuff, like those kind of games on there. But my training was back to very, very limited. And then I started looking into the opportunity to go back to Germany again. So I came back home in June, and in July I was back in Germany again, back with my club in Leverkusen. And yeah, same thing. So at that point we were going 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday with Leverkusen. I was in the weight room 4 days a week. And then I made contacts with a club in Netherlands. The restrictions started to weaken, and we were allowed to travel and that kind of stuff. We were still doing our testing 3 times a week with our rapid tests. So then I reached out. I found a club in Netherlands. I started training with them, as well as the Netherlands national team, through one of my contacts, Dominic Albrecht. He was being recruited by a coach from this Polish club team, Silesia. For a few years now, that coach has been trying to get him over. The coach's name is Adam Malik. So I told Dominic, I'm like, hey man, if you're looking to go to Poland and play this year, like I would love to get the opportunity to get more competitions in. I felt like here in Canada, that's one of the things that we're lacking is the opportunities to train and play at a high level. So I'm like, I told him, if you're looking to go, like I would love to come and, maybe we can both play on the same team. This would be an amazing experience for both of us, I feel. So yeah, he reached out to the coach, and the coach wanted us to come over. So the way that it works in Poland is the club system is like the nationals is like a three tournament system. So it's one weekend it's 1 weekend, the first weekend of the month for 3 months. So we had 3 tournaments. In that first tournament, Dominic was in Tokyo with the German team, so he didn't attend, but the next 2 he did. And yeah, we were able to go undefeated that season. We won the Polish championship, and yeah, it was a great experience. By the end of it, at the peak of my training in Germany, I was going seven sessions a week on court and 4 days a week in the weight room. So I feel like that was a lot better than I would have gotten in Canada at the time, and at a much higher level. Like the team that I was training with, the club team had 4 current national team members, and I believe 3 or 4 ex-national team members that had, won bronze at the 2012 games in London. So my experience there was very good.
So was it a bit of a culture shock coming back to Canada again?
Yeah, when we came back from the qualifier, to find out that for some reason Canada decided to pull our exemption and we could no longer train. In my mind, we're still Paralympic athletes. We're still high performance athletes. We still, require to train at that level. And, I understand that unfortunately we didn't qualify for the Tokyo games, but, the next games in Paris were just 3 years away, right? Like, 3 years sounds like a long time, but in the grand scheme of things, like, I don't really think it is, right? And if we lose out on 3 months, 6 months, a year of training because we're locked down and other countries aren't, we just keep falling behind. So yeah, it was definitely a shock to come back home and be stuck at minimal training at best and doing whatever I could at home in my house. So that was why I decided to take my fate into my own hands and go back to Germany. I understand that volleyball and sitting volleyball is a very team-based game. I feel like it's unlike a lot of other sports, whereas in basketball, like whether it's standing or wheelchair, like one player can have a huge impact, right? Like he can carry the ball up the court, he can shoot by himself, like whatever, right? He can do everything. In football, same thing, right? One guy can dribble up the court and or up the field, up the pitch, I guess, as you say, and score a goal. But in volleyball, you literally have to pass the ball to someone else and they have to pass it back to you, right? So, I understand that, me training somewhere else, like isn't our whole team training somewhere else, but at least like one piece is getting stronger while everyone else is hopefully maintaining their level or getting a little bit better as much as they could, right?
Mm-hmm. A lot of people be surprised to hear you speak, Derek, in terms of obviously you've played professionally overseas in wheelchair basketball and played at a high level in another Paralympic sport. Obviously, for me, that's kind of it's an achievement to be said. But be it for the able-bodied person listening, how much is it talent, how much is it nurture for you to be able to transition from one sport to another, and there's not a lot of similarities?
I can 100% tell you it is all grind. It was all grind. So when I was growing up, I played sports quite a bit. Like that was, I guess, my passion. So my two major sports were volleyball and basketball. I was definitely better at volleyball. I had more of a passion for volleyball. From my high school years, when I was in high school, I was a coach. When I was in my senior year, I coached my junior team. I was a certified referee. I played in clubs. I, did all that stuff. For basketball, I just played on my high school team. Like that was pretty much it. And I played some pickup at the park with my friends, right? But then, around like 18, 20, real life hit and I had to get a job and start working, making money, right? So the sports kind of fell away. And then my accident was when I was 26, I believe, maybe 27, around there. And I was 26. And then, the first 3 to 4 years of that were literally just like all rehab, just 100% rehab. And then, I started playing volleyball, sitting volleyball in 2012 and had a passion for that. And it was, in 2016 when we didn't qualify for their games in Rio, that was when I kind of pivoted towards wheelchair basketball. And at first it was, in my mind, it was just a way to cross train. Like that's literally all it was. I live in Toronto, and 3 of my friends that were playing with us, sitting volleyball or had played sitting volleyball with us, were approached by Mike Frogley, a legend in wheelchair basketball out here, and asked to come to the academy, which is like a full-time training center for wheelchair basketball. And at the time in volleyball, I thought I was doing a lot, and I thought I was being a high-performance athlete. And then I got exposed to what it meant to start training at a high level in a different sport, in wheelchair basketball. And like I said, my 3 friends were approached to come, and I managed to somehow weasel my way into getting them to invite me as well. Because like at that point, they hadn't seen me. I hadn't been at the previous games, that the Pan Am Games in Toronto there. So the coach hadn't been exposed to me, didn't really know me. But I showed up this one day and I was like, hey, I want to do this thing as well. He's like, we like show up 6 a.m. tomorrow and we'll see what happens. And showed up 6 a.m. the next day. And he's like, okay, I guess you come maybe like twice this week. And then eventually it became to like getting accepted into the center and like working out there full time. So that's when my eyes really opened to wheelchair basketball and to what high performance really meant. We were going, I guess at that point, 5 days a week, 2 hours each day. We would do a team session. on court. And then 1 hour a day, we'd do more like an individual small group session, more individual skills. On top of that, we'd be in the weight room 3 days a week. And then the other 2 days a week, we'd be doing like prehab to do like preventative injury kind of stuff. And that first year, I was the worst player by far. Of the 4 guys that started, was definitely the bottom. I never saw the chance for myself to become pro or to get onto the national team. Like, that's not something that was even on my horizon. That's how bad I was in this sport. I never really like sat in a chair. Like I did like a little 5K in a wheelchair, but this was just like a horrible, like foldable, portable chair. And I did like a 10K in one as well, just because, I wanted to do a 5K or a 10K and I couldn't do it walking because of my injuries. But apart from that, I hadn't really pushed a chair. So, trying to learn all these new skills everything was just foreign to me. I remember like my first year was literally just pushing up and down the court. If I happen to get into the key, like I'm a big man, right? So I want to get into the key, into the basket, and shoot an easy shot. If I happen to get into the key, they would pass me the ball, and I'd miss like 4 times in a row, and then somebody else could get the rebound, and they go the other way. So like somebody, like the fast person on the other team would just sit in front of my chair, and I'd be stuck there, and I couldn't go anywhere, right? So training wasn't necessarily a lot of fun, but for me, like I said, I was looking at it as cross training, staying fit for volleyball, because we hadn't qualified for the games, we lost the funding that we received here in Canada. So it was more difficult for us to continue training. There isn't a club system in Canada for city volleyball. I just kind of pivoted there. And it wasn't a matter of like, oh yeah, I was the most talented guy in the court, and that's how I shifted to wheelchair basketball. It was literally like I was the worst guy there, and I just continued to grind, and I continued to grind, and I continued to grind. And after like the 4th year of being at the academy, I was finally at a level where, I felt like I could play a little bit. The team that I was on in, I guess it was 2019, we went and played with the academy. We went and played in the NWBA in the US. It's a high level league. We played in, I believe it was in Division 2 that year, and our team was able to like win the championship. And that was what really made me think like, hey, yeah, I could really do this sport. And then when we went out to Peru for city volleyball, I kind of like right before we left, I posted my a little highlight video and a profile up on the IWBF website saying that I'm looking for teams out in Europe. And I was happy to find that 4 or 5 teams reached out to me, and we ended up making a deal with the Kelowna 99ers, and it was a great experience to go over there and play. But I feel like 100% it was hard work and keep grinding and don't give up kind of attitude, more so than it was I have the talent. I guess one thing that you can say is you can't teach size, and I'm a big guy, so that really helps. But apart from that, I feel like it was hard work.
What would be your message to people listening, be it if they newly acquired their amputation or they're a developing athlete, in terms of the work ethic that you talk about? It's okay, I made it nice and glossy of you've transitioned from one national program to another, but you're talking about 4 years of dedication.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was literally 5 days a week, waking up at 5, 6 a.m. in the morning. Training would start at 7 a.m. for us. It's hard work, right? If it's something that you are passionate about, it doesn't necessarily always feel like work. There's definitely times that I felt like, oh, I can't do this. Like, I'm not good enough. Like, should I quit? Like, should I just stop wasting my time? But then I hear stories of these guys that were training with me that are on the national team. Like one of the guys, Bo Hedges, I was told a story that he went out and tried out for the national team 10 times before he finally made the squad, right? It's that sort of dedication that it takes to develop the skills required to be a vital piece on a national team or on a professional team somewhere, right? If anyone that's acquired a new injury or is looking to get into parasport or any sport at a high level, it's literally like what you put in is what you get back, right? The one thing that I wish I would have done differently was that those first couple of years when I was at the academy, I was doing everything they were asking me to do, but there was opportunities for me to stay later and put up more shots to improve in my shooting game, which was one of my like weak points, right? Like I could have stayed and done more chair skills to make myself faster, but it's about trying to figure out, what more you can do, right? Like doing the bare minimum is good, but like it's not going to get you to where you want to be, right? If your goal is to go to a Paralympics, to go play pro, to be the best, then you need to train like no one else does, right? Like that's what I think a lot of people don't understand, right? It's the Mamba mentality of Kobe Bryant, right? Like I'm gonna outwork my opponent, right? If he's in the gym 4 days a week, I'm gonna be in the gym 5 days a week. If he's in the gym 5 days a week, I'll be in the gym 6 days a week, right? And that's what really like wheelchair basketball has opened up my eyes to, is what a high performance program really meant to be, right? And then after coming back from overseas playing pro basketball, I tried to implement that for myself in sitting volleyball. So I've booked my own court times here, like as much as I can. Like right now, it's only 3 days a week, but I've been attempting to get 5 days a week on court so I can train different things. And I just find that my mentality is I'm trying to adopt, I guess, that Mamba mentality where I'm just gonna outwork my opponents, right? If you're at this level and your opponents are here, the only way that you're gonna make up that gap is to work harder, right?
So let me ask you this then, Derek, because I was in the sports in volleyball, so I've got a little bit of an advantage from an insider perspective. So what you're talking about to get up to a level of getting up with, I would say, probably the rest, so the Germans, the Russians, the Egyptians. How do you get to the level of the Iranians and the Bosnians in your particular circumstance?
So I've talked to a lot of the German players, right? And I guess the message they relay is the fact that in Iran, you get paid to play sitting volleyball. It's a job. There's professional leagues at the highest of levels. These guys are doing it, they live it. Like this is what they do. They live, breathe, sleep, sitting volleyball. Like that's what they do. In Germany, they have sitting leagues. In most European countries, they have sitting leagues where you can go and you can compete at a really high level with good teams. And the other major factor is the fact that, when I was in Germany, I went to compete in Poland in these 3 tournaments. I took a flight. The flight was an hour and a half long, and I was in Poland and I was ready to play. Here in Canada, when I go to my training camp, right? So we have a training camp model where we meet usually once a month for 4 or 5 days. When I fly over to my training camp, it's a 4-hour flight, right? So it just gives you an idea of the difference in scale and size of my country compared to like all of Europe, right? Canada is huge, and our population like isn't very big. I believe the population in Canada is very similar to the population of Poland. It's about like 35 million, around there somewhere. Like Germany has 8 club teams for sitting volleyball, maybe 9. I don't want to misspeak, but they have a population of like 80 something million people, right? It's the more people you have, the more disabled people you have to pick from to play these sports. I don't really know the population of Iran, but I feel like that's where the gap is happening, is the opportunity to compete at a high level consistently, right? Teams like Russia and Iran will play each other often, right? Bosnia, Russia will play each other often. There's European championships just happened maybe like a month and a half ago, where Bosnia was there, Germany was there, Russia was there, Ukraine was there. All these high-level teams get to compete against each other all the time. And like the saying goes, steel sharpens steel, right? Here in Canada, we don't really have those opportunities. And I feel like that's where, if we want to go to that next level as a country in this sport, that's what needs to change. We need to eventually get to a position where we have that club system in place where guys can compete, whether it's with able-bodied athletes or not, integrated, it doesn't matter. But, we just need more opportunities to play at that level where, there's something for guys to work towards.
Do you think with obviously your continental competition only being every 4 years, obviously you're based on the geography alone, you're at its like disadvantage. Well, I know for a fact you're at a definite disadvantage to say, be it where my program was with British in volleyball, being in Europe, and had to obviously gain the respect of a lot of the other European countries. And did we get there by London? Maybe yes or no, depending on who you ask. But where I see the issue where you and the Canadian program are suffering is obviously you've got one of those major players, be it the Brazilians, but you only see them maybe every 4 years.
Yeah, that's the tough part, right? Like, so we're pretty close with the US, and we've, had the US come for scrimmages and like exhibition matches and that kind of stuff. But yeah, like in our zone, Brazil is and has been like head and shoulders above the pack, right? So it's always been, when we have our Pan Am Games, it's Brazil first, USA second, Canada third, and then, usually like Colombia fourth, and then Costa Rica, Peru, whatever other countries decide to come out. We have, in our zone, even when we have these zonals, we have maybe 4 to 6 teams come out. Yeah, 3 or 4 of them are competitive, and then it kind of like really starts to fall off, right? Like in European Championships that just happened, there were 16 men's teams. I believe it was 16 men's teams and 11 women's teams. And everyone is vying, obviously the top team like Russia, Bosnia are at a high level, but then, you have like the Germany and the Ukraines, but then after that, everyone else is still quite competitive and still vying for those spots, right? I feel like when you have so many countries to play against at any time, that you want to be able to want to have a training camp, is fine, right? So like leading up to this Paralympic qualifier for us this past year, we were very limited. We were in lockdown, and we weren't able to even have our regional training camps. And I heard stories about countries like Kazakhstan going and having training camps with Russia, right? Like, so they're going over there and they're playing these top level countries. So then we come into this tournament and we're underprepared. We haven't really trained. We had maybe like 2 in-person training camps prior to this tournament. And I'm not trying to make excuses, right? But these countries are going out and playing pretty much daily, right? And then going and competing with these countries at high levels. They're going to be ahead of us when we get to these events. And for us, it took a few days to get into the swing of things and knock the rust off. And then, so our first few days were pretty, our performance wasn't where it needed to be, but, we finished off the tournament pretty strong. And I think the only way for us to bridge that gap is to have more like zonal competitions, right? At the same time that European Championships were happening this year, we were scheduled to have a zonal in our region. But for some reason, World Para Volley decided to cancel our zonal event, but allow the European event to happen, right? And then there was a question on whether we were going to qualify for World Championship next year because of world ranking points, right? So like the European event happened and everyone there gains world ranking points. Our event doesn't happen. We don't gain world ranking points. So now you can get leapfrogged by other teams. It's just COVID's made everything very, very difficult,
Do you think if we rewind back to the issue you mentioned about Kazakhstan, of obviously your governing body is playing by the rules set by the Canadian government, and obviously the Kazakhstan would maybe have a set of different rules. Do you think, obviously, from that perspective, obviously sport is never fair, but in terms of it's made it a little bit more chaotic, and I'm not going to use the word shambolic, but in terms of you are playing by a set of rules and they're playing with another deck, so shall we say?
Yeah, like you mentioned, right? Sport is never fair, right? If you live in a first world country where you don't have to worry about finding food and putting, food on your table, getting a roof over your head. You have a better advantage to train usually than somebody in a third world country that, has to worry about, where their next meal is going to come from, like all those things, right? Like, I feel like, you know, harping on those kind of issues doesn't really make us move forward. It just kind of keeps us down and keeps us behind. Like, yes, they played by their own set of rules. The Kazakhstan government had whatever rules they had in place. Maybe they followed other protocols or not. Like, I don't know. Do I wish that I had the opportunity to go and play and compete against other countries during the pandemic? 100%. Do I fault Kazakhstan for doing it? Not at all.
Well, you could say to a certain extent that's old Soviet buddies looking out for each other in terms of the USSR, of that being a former territory of theirs. The relationship is probably very, very close.
It might be right, and I think that's like in life, in sport as well. It's about the relationships you have, right? So if you're on good terms with some of these other teams, they'll invite you for tournaments. If you're not, you won't even know the tournament's happening, right? Um, I feel like that's one of the big issues that we had with, for sitting volleyball in Canada. Like, it started really late. It started in about 2007, I think it shifted to sitting volleyball. Before that, we were doing really well, but in standing volleyball. So, it's amputees, but they're playing with their prosthetic legs on and their arms and whatever. I believe Canada won like a world championship gold at one point. But then we shifted to sitting volleyball in 2007 because the governing body decided it was more inclusive, and that's the way that we're going to play para volleyball at this point. But all these other countries in Europe and stuff like that had been playing sitting volleyball for decades before that, right? So we were definitely behind the eight ball to start. Our performances at our events weren't necessarily where we wanted them to be. And then, yeah, at that point, you don't get invited to these other invitational tournaments, right? Where teams want to compete against teams around their same skill level, right? Like the statement I said before, like steel sharpens steel, right? Like, nobody wants to play a team where they win like 25-5, right? It's not competitive for either team. It's not fun for the team that's losing. It's not fun for the team that's winning. And maybe the team that's losing might have an opportunity to gain more experience and to learn the things that they need to work on. But I definitely think that making those relationships is very important. And hopefully Canada moving forward is in a different place than we were in years back. Maybe now we've after our performance in Duisburg, I feel like we were exposed to some countries that we hadn't been exposed to before. So like now we know the Kazakhstans, we know the Ukrainians, the Germans, right? The Croatians. Like, now they're talking to us about coming and having events out there in Europe. So our next event is actually going to be like a friendly tournament out in Kazakhstan in February, right? So is it is it unfair? Sure, but this is the reality of the world we live in, and life's not fair. No one's going to hand it to you. You got to go and get it, right? So do I fault Kazakhstan for training the way they did? Does it bother me? No.
They surprised me, but that's obviously I'm talking about. I retired from sitting volleyball 8 years ago, so in terms of the
Right.
progression
Mhm.
that they've made, we're talking about 8 years of progression. So should I have been shocked? No, but obviously moving yourself away from the sport a little bit, it probably
Mhm.
goes, well, they're shorter than everybody else, except that obviously the big giant that's
One big
bigger
guy,
than
right?
they're bigger
Yeah.
than you.
Mhm.
But obviously he's not one and alone with the sport. With obviously the Iranians have what he's probably more famous, the Iranian worldwide,
Awesome.
from a Paralympic perspective, just because of his height. But I think because I played them at World Champs in, well, God, it feels so long ago, over a decade ago in
Yeah, right.
2010. But and obviously we did we lose? I think we beat them 3-2. So that kind of
Wow.
shows their progression of
Mhm.
where they've come to almost qualify for Tokyo and GB get in because they're hosts.
Yeah, right.
So
Yeah.
and not being on the radar. because of other issues, probably similar to the likes of the US and Canada, and maybe some aspects of would to do with funding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like I don't really. So like my only experience with Kazakhstan was, I believe, in like 2014. I think they were at like last chance qualifier tournament, but I don't really remember playing them. But yeah, like now they're known for being very scrappy. Their defense is very strong. So yeah, they're not the biggest team. They have that one guy that's really big. He's like over 2 meters. I don't know his exact height. But yeah, he's big. But apart from that, like their team is just good fundamentally, right? They have strong serving, they have strong attacking, and their defense is unreal. They don't let very many balls fall. And they actually 3-0 Germany in the preliminaries of our qualifier. And then Germany was able to beat them, I believe was 3-2 in the final. So they're a strong team, and it shows, it speaks to the testament that, you can overcome these things, right? Like they aren't the biggest team, right? But you work towards your strengths. Like if you're not going to be the biggest team, then be the fastest team, right? If you're not going to be the fastest team, just be the best fundamental team, like whatever it is, right? Like every team can pull something together, and it's not always about having, the biggest guys on the court or the 6 best players in the world on the court. Like, chemistry in sport matters a lot. We can both speak to that. And, there's been many a time where, 6 less skilled players have played together and beat players or teams of a higher caliber because they play together better. They understand where each of them is going to be and what position they need to play and what role they need to play in a certain time, right?
I echo that, Derek. In terms of, I think the legacy of London 2012 is the style of play that we brought. Obviously, we weren't the biggest, not the fastest. We haven't got decades of experience that you talked about earlier in the episode. So we had to find a style that suited, obviously, GB volleyball, and it was taking probably aspects of from the women's game of, it's not conventionally like the men's about all power, be it the exception being the Americans, the Russians. Have got bigger athletes. Thus, I think you saw later on in the tournaments, you've seen the Iranians effectively running the same plays that we do, but more effectively. But so it's like, well, okay, we've brought a new dynamic to the sport because maybe those teams necessarily didn't have to do that in the past, but they've seen that it's effective, it works. Okay, let's implement that into our game again. So I guess as a sport, it's an evolution in terms of, okay, we've not reinvented the wheel, or our coaching staff hasn't reinvented the wheel. We've kind of maximized what we've got and utilizing, well, we can't do the conventional thing because we've been swept off the court. I've been in a position of what you've talked about, of losing 25-5 in the World Champs against the Russians. You fast forward 2 years on, okay, we weren't super competitive in London 2012. And I said this to family, that's probably the worst. And I played the Russians probably a lot in those 2 years, which I think exemplifies what you were saying of, I've had probably more exposure to those high-level teams just based on where I live. That's probably the worst I saw them play was in London 2012 because of the obviously the I can't think of the word, but in terms of, we had 99% of the crowd, so thus it's an intimidating environment. And I think because of, say, if we rewind probably the games previously, where obviously the Olympic crowds would have been huge in China, Paralympic crowd wasn't like that. So I guess for them it's like, well, we don't normally get arenas full, like 10,000 people. I think probably would have been the same. Thus, it's probably intimidating. If we would have probably been maybe accelerated a couple of years forward, we probably could take advantage and make it, 25-20, and you're in a match.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. And like, what's happened with sitting volleyball in the UK since London? Is it just kind of fallen off?
Pretty much gone in the toilet. And that it's sad to see. I probably saw it probably going to happen long before the games even happened. It's like, well, is this going to be a flash in the pan experiment? See, I was proven right. Did I see the program last into Rio? In the men's team, it was probably going to be very, very difficult just by the region that we're in of qualifying outright. It was we were probably in the middle of the pack of the probably tier 3 nations with the Croats, the Dutch, and now it's because of money, because of not being able to attract new players, probably in the same position of you guys and the Americans in kind of this wilderness. And they've got the luxury of being in Europe, thus because they're no longer deemed or seen as competitive because they're not on the main circuit. You've now lost all that credibility and respect that you earned in the lead up to London. Is I won't say pretty much lost, but obviously some countries we've still got. I still keep in touch with most of the Croats just because I was friendly with them, and we had a training camp before London. It's one of the only teams that would embrace having our presence with them. And okay, one of the guys did come over to train with us in the hopes of making the team, and that fell through. And I feel bad for him because ultimately he was sold a promise and a dream, and the governing body didn't actually keep to their words. So for him to kind of reciprocate it back and kind of go, okay, you come to us for 5 days to Zagreb, which it was an amazing experience for me, just from a cultural perspective, of going to a different country, let alone the volleyball, and we probably gained a lot more training those 5 days against another team versus training against ourselves. Even if we were full time in the run up to London, because one of the guys who didn't make the team, when he actually saw us at the game, it was like night and day. As the team he got dropped from to the team that turned up to the games, it was like a different beast. It's like, well, that's going to happen if you train 2-3 times a day with each other, almost 7 days a week. A team is going to transform instantly. Okay, a few of us were full-time before that, but it's like it's massive praise from somebody from the outside that's been within to kind of go, well, wow, it's like unrecognizable. But you have to probably credit the Croats for that, because they didn't have to do that, didn't have to train with us in their off season because they didn't qualify. It was probably a little bit of humility and humanity to kind of go, well, we're going to give you the best preparations that we can, and we hope you do very well. And I probably, my hat goes off to them. Okay, it's now 9 years later, but I still speak to Ivan quite often in terms of,
of course,
it's like massively appreciated to kind of go, maybe I probably undervalued at the time, but it's those things that you talk about of being exposed to the better teams are invaluable, because ultimately when you come up against teams in the tournament, there is no, okay, there was back then, there was obviously 12 teams, so there are some whooping boys, just basically because Africa's once you drop off from Egypt, it's not very good. And obviously they had 2, because I don't agree with this, but being Africa split into 2 of above the Sahara and below it, it's like, well, it's one continent. If they should all play together, and because Europe is huge, you could say, well, why isn't North and South America split like in other sports? I think Canada and America would be very happy with that. It's like a 2-horse race, and the winner takes the prize. And obviously Brazil would win in South America, thus you don't have to face them and you've got more chance. But I think, coming back to your point of that exposure, I think obviously what we've alleviated from is you have to gain that kind of country's respect before they will give you a seat at the table. And I think
Yeah.
obviously you've managed to do that by being invited to Kazakhstan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that a lot of it comes down to, I agree with you to a certain extent where it's, like earning that respect and stuff like that. But the way that I've kind of looked at it is, just trying to expedite my own growth and reaching my potential. The opportunities for me to do that here in Canada were quite limited, to find that full-time training center environment that once I was exposed to that full-time training center in wheelchair basketball, I realized that is the kind of environment that I would thrive under, right? The growth that I was able to make in wheelchair basketball in 4 years was greater than the growth that I made in sitting volleyball from 2012 to, at the time, I guess it would have been 2018 or whatever it was, 2019. So in my mind, I'm like, well, like if my growth in this other sport is so much faster, like what is the factor? And the factor for me was the full-time training center environment. So I tried to find that myself, and then, going overseas, going to Germany and being able to, like last year training there 3 days a week. And then when I went this year, I was, like I said, like 7 times a week, I was training with the German club team, Leverkusen. I was invited to training camps with the German national team. I was training with them, and we were doing scrimmages in those training camps. And then training with the Dutch team. There was a club team that's not, I don't know, maybe like an hour and a half drive away from where I was living. So I was going on Tuesday nights to that training with the Dutch team, and then on Fridays, I would have a training with my club in Leverkusen from 4 to 6. And then I would take a 2.5 hour drive to go to Netherlands, so I could train with their national team on like Friday, and then 2 sessions on Saturday. So like I realized what I needed in order to expedite my growth, and I was able to find that in Europe. I wish I was able to find that here in Canada. Unfortunately, that's not the reality that I live in. But I think that a lot of athletes expect things like that to be maybe given to them, and don't understand that there is other opportunities to help their growth and find their potential quicker, maybe in another geographical location. And for wheelchair basketball, it was very easy, right? Like I went over there, I went to Germany to play, and they covered my flights, they covered my apartment, and I received support in that way. I went over to play sitting volleyball, and it was all on my own dime, right? Like, so I go there for 3 months last year, and I went there for 4 months this year. Like each trip cost about like $15,000, right? And that's not something that's, I guess, a possibility for most players to do, right? For me, I'm really passionate about sport, about trying to maximize my potential. And so I chose to do that. And it's a lot of sacrifice that people don't understand, right? I have a fiance here in Canada. We have a house, an apartment, a flat that we pay for. So when I go over to Europe, like I'm still paying for the flat here in Toronto. And then I'm paying for an apartment in Europe. I'm paying for, car and insurance and gas and food and my flights. Like it all adds up. And, I don't want to feel like I'm like, oh, woe is me. But, it's not cheap. I wish that there were more professional leagues that you can play in sitting volleyball. Like I know that like Iran has one of those leagues, but it's difficult to be. There's a lot of politics involved. It's difficult to be invited to play in those leagues. I know that like Brazil has a fairly strong league as well, and I know of a few players from Europe that were invited to play in that league this year. And my aspiration is to one day be invited to play in Brazil, to be invited to play in Iran, and play at the highest of levels. Like that's what I want to do. Whether it's if I can't do it by qualifying for the Paralympics, then I want to go and play in an Iranian league to see how I stack up against these players. And for me, it's about trying to absorb any information that I can from these players, right? These guys that have been at the highest of levels, and are they doing things differently than me? Like I watch a ton of gameplay, I watch a ton of video, and I try to analyze people's play that have similar, injuries, impairments to myself, and be like, how does he move on the court? Like one of the better players, one of the best players in Russia, Savichev. He's also a single leg above knee amputee. For him, it's a little more advantageous. He's on the other side, so it helps. He's left leg amputee, and he's right-handed, so he's able to push in a different way when he attacks than I am. But for the longest time, I'd always sit with my legs out in front of me, and then I watch the Russians, and they're all playing with their leg tucked, and I'm like, why don't I start trying to play like this? And I gained resistance when I first started trying that, and guys are like, oh, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. Like, you shouldn't try it. Like, just, you're not flexible enough. And I'm like, oh, well, if I'm not flexible enough, then I'll start stretching more. So I started stretching like literally an hour. I literally started stretching an hour a day, like to try to be able to like sit in this position while I play, right? And these are the kind of things that, I was willing to sacrifice to try to get to that highest of levels, right? And, maybe I get there, maybe I don't, who knows? But at this point, I have all this information, I have all this knowledge, and I'm willing to pass it on to the next generation. Like, I would love to get into coaching one day and, further the development of the sport in my country. Like I said before, I would love to start a sitting volleyball league in Canada. That's something that, I want to try getting off the ground as well to help this sport grow as much as possible, so that, I don't want to, so hopefully it doesn't go the same way as it did in your country, right? I don't want it to just fall away. I don't want it to stop here. I understand that funding is a huge thing, but, eventually if somebody wants to do it, they can push for a bit. And, there's a lot of corporations out there that are willing to help fund, like Parasport. I think it's very on trend right now. Like, Toyota really backed a lot of Parasport, like leading up to the games in Tokyo, right? So, I know that, like, when I was in Germany, like, they were sponsored by one of their sponsors was Toyota. Like, the wheelchair basketball program in Canada was partly funded by Toyota, right? Like, so there is opportunities to find that funding in other places and grow the sport that I'm so passionate about.
What do you think is missing then, Derek? Because obviously what you alluded to is culture of the American basketball team. I apologize. Stay off the bat with that one. I apologize.
No, it's okay.
Be it, obviously they've got a pedigree and a very established history within the program. Why do you think that outside of wheelchair basketball and say anything to do with ice hockey, the Canadians are missing a step? Because ultimately you are, I think, as a nation, quite determined, quite rugged. I think the actual environment that you live in is quite in a quite hostile environment. Obviously, outside of Ontario and things like that. Obviously, once you go further west and further north, it's very bleak. Obviously, we're recording in December. I wouldn't want to be outside.
Yeah, it's a little cold. Yeah.
But why do you think that you have to be proactive and go out of your way to spend, obviously, money out of your pocket, and we're talking Canadian dollars, not US dollars now. Yeah. So it's a lot of money to establish yourself to get better, because ultimately you obviously came against flexibility, and I'm in coaching now. It's like, it's not a big deal. It's like, if you want to improve your range of movement and you only have to stretch more, that's not a big deal. I would say to you, go for it. What do you need? What do you need to be facilitated for you to be able to be at your peak? If it's going to make you better player and better performance, I'd say praise it in terms of, if it didn't work, obviously they wouldn't be using it. And we're talking about obviously somebody that's been in the game over a decade.
Right.
In the sport, and ultimately still successful and winning individual awards and tournaments.
Yeah, I think the biggest difference between sitting volleyball and these other sports that you mentioned, with wheelchair basketball and sledge hockey, or para ice hockey as they call it, the major difference is how long it's been developed in the country, right? So we're about 20, 30 years behind where wheelchair basketball started, right? So now there's wheelchair basketball leagues in Canada. I'm not going to say that they're most competitive, but they exist, right? There's club teams you can go and play sledge hockey with, and unfortunately there isn't anything like that for sitting volleyball yet. And like I mentioned to you earlier, the sitting volleyball has only started in Canada in 2007. Like that's one of the major reasons I think why we are where we are, and why I chose to go overseas. Like for us, so here in my city right now, there's two athletes. It's me and our young libero named Nassif. We have one player in Montreal. We have one player in Edmonton. I think we have 4 players in Calgary, and we have 2 players in Manitoba, right? So it's with these vast distances to get to any of these cities. Oh, we also have one player in Thunder Bay in Ontario, but that's like a 18-hour drive or something silly like that. So he's in my province, but like he's inaccessible to me pretty much, unless I fly there, he flies here. It's very difficult, and it's not a profession here, right? Most guys have jobs, go to school, have a life outside of sitting volleyball, right? So it's whereas with the guys in wheelchair basketball, they've been developing the sport for a lot longer. They were finally, after around the time of like the Pan Am Games in Toronto, they were able to start like a full-time training center, doing like a centralized model. Guys were offered, the organization was able to get them, part-time jobs and that kind of stuff, like in the building where we train at Toronto Pan Am Sports Center, right? So guys would like just man the front desk or do whatever, like, to try to offset the cost of living there. There's, a lot of people had to relocate from their home province to Toronto. There's a legacy housing project that's in place. So, high performance athletes that train at this location at CSIO are able to get on a wait list to try to get into this apartment building that has subsidized rent for high performance athletes and low income people, right? So, whereas rent in Toronto usually goes for $2,500 a month, these people are able to get their rent subsidized, and they're paying $500 a month or $600 a month to live there, right? There's funding in the program because they've been successful. They have more funding than us. They're able to incentivize people to come to those programs, right? Like we're sitting volleyball. It's we haven't had that success yet, where the government sees us as being podium potential, so they're not pouring that money into us yet, right? That's unfortunately, it's the nature of the beast, right? Like everyone says, like, oh, I can't get better because there isn't enough money. It's like, well, like there isn't enough money because you're not better, but like I'm not better because there isn't, and you're just like chasing your tail all the time, right? So eventually something has to change, and someone has to be willing to sacrifice, whether it's their time or their money or whatever, to go out and get better and get that program to a level where it needs to be, right? Like with beach volleyball for a long time, that's where they were with with our sports body. They weren't receiving any sort of funding, and then finally they went out and started performing. The athletes started to fund the camps on their own dime and that kind of stuff. Like even with the sitting women's program, like right now they qualified for the last 2 Paralympics, right? They were in Rio, and they just came back from their best performance in Tokyo. They finished 4th, right? They had an opportunity to finish top 3. Like that's amazing. And now I feel like the exposure is getting better, like with social media and that kind of stuff, right? Like we can definitely, I think the biggest thing has been the exposure of the sport, right? Before I started playing, I didn't know what sitting volleyball was. I'd never heard of it. I've never seen it. Like even when I try to explain to a stranger on the street when I run into them, it's like, hey, yeah, what do you do? Like, yeah, I play sitting volleyball. Oh yeah, you guys play in wheelchairs? Like, how does this work, right? I'm like, no, you sit on the floor. It's like, oh, you play on an 8-foot net. Like, no, our net's lower, our court's a bit smaller. Lucky now I have some like videos on my phone that I can like pull up and show people. But I think that overcoming all those hurdles is what's been limiting the growth of the sport here. And that's why, I chose to take my future into my own hands, my own destiny into my own hands, and go and do this stuff overseas at high cost, right? There was a lot of sacrifice, financial. Like, I was away from my loved ones. I was away from my fiance for like 4 months this time, 3 months the last time. Like, those things aren't easy, but without sacrifice, there is no gain, right? Mm-hmm. We must always give up something if we want to achieve greatness, whether it's time, money, or other intangibles, right? And I'm willing to do that to achieve my goals.
Some might say, though, Derek, why don't you not take the easy way out and transfer fully to wheelchair basketball? Because you've shown that you were capable of competing at a high level. Thus, that unless I would probably disagree to a certain extent, but if we use that model of you've got the outlet to play professionally in Germany, Italy, Spain, pretty much most European countries have got a professional basketball league. Mm-hmm. Why do you not go and why do you not just say, well, I've attempted to get as good as I can, but there's a ceiling that's stopping me getting any further. Why don't I just go to this one, and then obviously the trajectory is mine and mine alone.
I feel like if humanity had that mindset, we would have never gone to the moon, right? We would have never gone into outer space. We don't do things because they're easy. We do them because they're hard, right? Yes, I can take the easy route. I'm not going to say it's easy, but I can take the easy route and go and change sports, and I can go to an individual sport. I can go to track and field. I can do those things, but this is the sport that I'm passionate about. I really care about the guys that I'm friends and teammates with, and I want to see us be able to find that success that I know we're capable of. I see how I see the level that we have the potential to achieve, and I feel like we're not there yet. And I don't even feel like I'm at my max potential in this sport. I feel like I still have a lot to learn, and I still have a lot of growth to make. And I love learning. I love, being a sponge and listening to the feedback of other individuals. And I still play wheelchair basketball. I still do that. I just don't necessarily do it at that same level. I have chosen to, put my efforts into trying to qualify with volleyball, right? When before going to Peru, I tried out for the national team in Canada for wheelchair basketball, and I unfortunately didn't make it. I'm not the youngest of guys. I'm 39 years old, right? I'm never going to get any younger. We have other guys that are coming up that are the same class that maybe aren't the same size as I am, but, are pretty quick. And maybe if they, another guy that's 26 years old has 13 years before he gets to my age, right? Like what kind of development can he make in those 13 years as opposed to like where I am right now, right? So the organization chose to go in a different route. There was obviously legends like Pat Anderson were on the team. Like he was one of the guys that went to Tokyo, like Nick Gonchin. Unfortunately, like there was another guy, another legend, David Ng. Unfortunately, because of the change in classification, like he wasn't one of the athletes that was chosen to go to Tokyo. But, so for me in my class to have tried to make it onto the national team in Canada at the time, it wasn't feasible. There's other 4s and 4-5s that were younger and more developed than me at the time. And so I chose to try to pursue greatness in sitting volleyball, right? And it's more work. It's the environment's more difficult. It's more individual than it is than other opportunities I have for other sports here. But I have a passion for it, and like I said, I see the potential that our team has, and I don't think that we've reached that potential yet. And until we haven't surpassed it, then I feel like I'm going to stay with the sport and, pursue it at this level. Eventually, like obviously I'll retire like everyone else does. but I feel like I'd still want to continue helping the team develop by, maybe helping and coaching or another avenue after I'm done.
I commend you for that.
Thank you.
So we're coming to the close of the episode, and I like to ask all my guests this. If you got to sit down with any athlete, dead or alive for that matter, who would that be and why?
So I kind of alluded to him earlier. Kobe Bryant would be the athlete that I chose. The reason is I would just like to pick his brain as to why he chose, the path that he did. Why he, I guess the same question you posed to me, why did he choose to put in all that extra work, right? Like, he was already one of the best in the game. Why did he continue to work as if he wasn't, right? And what kept him motivated, and just picking his brain about those things would be the reason that I'd want to sit down with him.
And my final question before we close the show, Derek, if you had to summarize what we've been speaking about into one sentence for people to take away, what would that be?
Never give up. Your destiny is in your own hands. If you work hard enough, you can achieve anything you want.
So once again, Derek, thanks again for coming on the Mindset Athlete podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks again for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed this episode and got loads from it. Anything that was included and discussed will be available in the show notes below. And I would love to hear from you. Come and connect and ask your questions. I've been James Roberts from jamesowenroberts.com. Remember this quote by Chris Harth: an athlete is a mindset. It's how you prepare, think, and execute, not by some elite status or physical stature. Anybody can be an athlete.